The caterer's name was Victor. He was a soft-spoken man in his mid-50s who ran a catering company out of a commercial kitchen on the east side of Phoenix, Arizona. He had a reputation for being meticulous, reliable, and deeply professional. When my mother-in-law, Patricia, called him 3 weeks before her 40th wedding anniversary party to tell him that the woman who had organized the entire event approved every menu choice, coordinated every delivery window, and signed every single contract on file with his company was actually, quote, just a helper we hired, not real family, Victor did something Patricia had not anticipated. He wrote it down. I did not find out what Patricia had told Victor until 7 days after the party, when he called me directly, specifically because my name was the only name on his paperwork. He was polite about it, professional even. He said, "Ms. Mercer, I want you to know the conversation happened, in case it matters to you, and I believe it does. It mattered, but before I tell you what I did with that information, take a moment to subscribe to The Quiet Reckoning if you're finding this story worth your time. And drop your city in the comments below. I genuinely read every single one, and I'm always curious where this community is listening from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because none of what happened on that Saturday in Phoenix makes any sense without understanding the 18 months that led up to it. My name is Sarah Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a freelance event coordinator based in Denver, Colorado. I've been doing this work for 11 years. I've planned corporate retreats for companies with 300 employees, destination weddings for people who had budgets larger than most people's mortgages, nonprofit galas, product launches, and once, memorably, a surprise retirement party for a federal judge that involved coordinating 17 vendors across 2 time zones without anyone finding out. I'm good at my job. I say that not to impress you, but because it is the single most important piece of context for everything that follows. I married Daniel Mercer 4 years ago in a small outdoor ceremony in Evergreen, Colorado. With 60 guests and a catered dinner, I planned myself. Daniel is a structural engineer, steady and practical and genuinely kind in ways I didn't know how to look for until I found them in him. His family is from Phoenix. His parents, Gerald and Patricia, have been married for 40 years, own a landscaping business they built from the ground up, and live in the same house in Scottsdale, where Daniel and his younger sister Claire grew up. Gerald is quiet and warm, and always remembers to ask about my work. Patricia is neither of those things, but she is consistent, and in the early years I mistook consistency for something safer than it actually was. The tension between Patricia and me was never dramatic in the beginning. It was the kind of friction that lives in small, almost deniable moments. She would ask Daniel questions about our finances, and then look at me when he answered, like she was checking my face for a lie. She would describe my work at family dinners using the word parties, like I planned birthday parties for children, rather than large-scale coordinated events that required licensing, insurance, and vendor management. She called me Han, but only ever in sentences that weren't quite compliments. You look tired, Han. You work so much, Han. I don't know how Daniel manages, Han. Claire was 29, 3 years younger than Daniel, unmarried and fully absorbed into her mother's orbit, in the way that some younger siblings are. She called Patricia every day. She lived 12 minutes from the Scottsdale house. She had strong opinions about every decision that involved the family, including the ones that also involved me, and she shared those opinions in a language of raised eyebrows and careful pauses that her mother understood fluently. When Gerald and Patricia's 40th anniversary came up on the calendar, Daniel mentioned it to me in January of last year, almost as a question rather than a statement. He said, "I don't suppose you'd want to help plan something for them, would you? I know it's a lot to ask." I said I would do it, because it seemed like a way to genuinely contribute something to the family that no one else could offer in quite the same way. And because Daniel's face when he asked had the particular look of a man who loves two separate parts of his life and desperately wants them to fit together, I spent the first 2 weeks of February making calls. I found a venue, a privately owned Spanish-style villa event space in North Scottsdale called Casa Dorada, with an outdoor terrace and a courtyard fountain, and a catering arrangement with Victor's company that the owner came highly recommended for. I negotiated a rate for 80 guests, coordinated a floral arrangement package with a local florist named Angela, booked a 4-piece acoustic ensemble through a music agency I'd worked with before, arranged for a custom anniversary cake through a bakery that Daniel's parents had used for their 25th, and locked in a photographer whose portfolio leaned warm and documentary rather than posed and staged, because that felt right for Gerald and Patricia's style. Every contract, every vendor agreement, every deposit payment confirmation came back with one name on it. Mine, Sarah Mercer. Because I was the coordinator of record, the professional responsible party, the person with the industry relationships and the clean credit history and the 11 years of paperwork behind her. Patricia knew this. I had walked her through every booking. I had sent her a detailed event summary document in late February, itemized by vendor, including contact names and payment schedules. She had responded with a single text message that read, "Looks good, hon." 2 words, no punctuation, the shortest possible acknowledgement of 6 weeks of professional level work. The total event cost came to $24,300. Deposits I had already paid personally from my business account came to $6,200. The remaining balance of $18,100 was to be covered by Gerald and Patricia, and later split with Claire, who insisted on contributing, though her portion was never made entirely clear to me. Daniel offered to help. I told him the deposits were manageable and that I wanted to handle it. He said thank you in the way that meant more than thank you. Over the next several months, I watched myself be systematically removed from the event I was building. This happened gradually, the way these things always happen, not in a single confrontation, but in an accumulation of small redirections. Patricia started calling the vendors directly with changes, bypassing me without mention. She called Angela, the florist, to change the centerpiece color palette from the warm terracotta tones I had selected to white and gold, which was fine as a preference, but which she hadn't mentioned to me before or after making the change. She called the bakery to alter the cake flavor and added a 3rd tier without updating the order through me, which meant the delivery timeline had to be renegotiated entirely when I found out about it accidentally 3 weeks before the event. When I raised these things with Daniel, he listened carefully and then said something that I think he meant as reassuring, but which landed somewhere different. He said, "She just gets excited about these things. She means well." I believed he believed that, and I let it go, because believing it was easier than the alternative. 3 weeks before the anniversary party, I flew down to Phoenix for a planning walk through at Casa Dorada. Daniel couldn't come. He had a project deadline, but he told me to send his love and said he'd fly down the day before the event. I drove to the venue directly from the airport, met with the events manager, walked the terrace setup with the catering contact, and spent about 90 minutes confirming final logistics. It was a productive visit. On the way back to my hotel, I stopped at the Scottsdale house to drop off a printed final event summary for Patricia, the kind of document I give every client, a clean single-page breakdown of vendor contacts, timeline, and emergency numbers. Patricia opened the door in a way that made me feel, for just a moment, like I had arrived unexpectedly. She thanked me for the document without looking at it, and then said, in a tone I can only describe as efficient, "By the way, we've decided to have Claire coordinate things on the day. It'll just be easier to have someone on the ground who knows everyone." She said it the way you tell someone a parking lot has changed, briefly and without waiting for a response. I drove back to my hotel and sat in the lobby for a while before going upstairs. I was the person who had planned the event. I was the person who had negotiated every rate and built every timeline and handled every revision without complaint for 6 months. And I had just been told, without discussion or acknowledgement of any of that someone who had attended 0 planning conversations and made 0 phone calls would be managing the day I had built. I called Daniel that evening. He went quiet when I told him, and then he said, "I'll talk to her." I told him it was fine, let it go, which was not true, but which felt easier to say than the truth. On the morning of the party, I drove to Casa Dorada early, before any guests arrived, to do what I always do at events I've planned, a quiet walkthrough to confirm everything was in place. The florist had set up correctly. The ensemble was doing a sound check on the terrace. Victor's catering team was moving through the kitchen with the particular focused efficiency of people who know exactly what they're doing. I introduced myself to Victor directly, because I always meet the lead caterer in person at events I coordinate. And we shook hands, and he said, "Ms. Mercer, everything is running exactly to your specifications." I thanked him and meant it. Claire arrived 45 minutes later in a linen blazer with a clipboard she had clearly bought for the occasion. She walked in greeting the vendors in a tone that implied familiarity she did not have, and when she reached Victor, she said, "I'm Claire Mercer, the family coordinator for today's event. Anything you need, come to me directly." Victor nodded without changing his expression. Later, he would tell me that he had checked her name against his contract file at that exact moment and not found it anywhere. Patricia arrived an hour before guests with Gerald and 3 of her sisters and their husbands. She moved through the venue, making small adjustments, touching things, rearranging a centerpiece by approximately 1 inch. When she reached the catering station, she introduced herself to Victor's team and then turned and said something that Victor heard clearly, that he noted specifically because of its deliberate tone. She said, "If you need anything coordinated, please go through Claire or myself. The woman who organized things, Sarah, is just a helper we brought in. She's not really family." She said it in the specific way that means the listener is supposed to understand something beyond the words. Victor told me later that he had smiled and said, "Of course," and then he had excused himself and gone directly back to his notes, where he had written it down. I did not hear this happen. I was on the other side of the terrace confirming the ensemble's set list when Patricia made that comment. I went through the entire event without knowing it had been said. I watched Gerald and Patricia renew their vows in the courtyard while 60 guests looked on. I watched Daniel toast his parents with a warmth and specificity that made several people cry. I stayed near the back, partly because that's where event coordinators tend to position themselves, and partly because I had spent 6 months building this moment for a family that had spent that same time quietly making clear that I was not quite part of it. The drive back to the hotel that night was quiet. Daniel sat in the passenger seat and held my hand and said, "It was beautiful. Sarah, genuinely, you did something incredible tonight." I said, "Thank you." He fell asleep within 10 minutes of getting back to the room, the deep, immediate sleep of someone who has been genuinely happy, and I lay awake looking at the ceiling for a long time, doing the thing I do when I'm processing something I don't yet have words for, running numbers in my head. $6,200 in deposits already paid, $18,100 outstanding, due to vendors within 7 business days of the event. Total of $24,300, all of it under my name. 7 days after the party, Victor called. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "I want to tell you about a conversation that happened before the event." He was precise and factual about it. He repeated Patricia's exact words without embellishment or editorial. He told me what he had noted. He said, "I want you to have this information because you are the only name on my contract, and I thought you should know what was being said about you in a context where that wasn't accurate." I thanked him. I sat with what he had told me for a long moment after the call ended. Then I opened my laptop and looked at the outstanding vendor invoices still sitting in my inbox. Victor's balance, $9,600. Angela the florist, $4,200. The music agency, $3,400. The photographer, $850. The bakery, $50 for the tier edition that I'd had to renegotiate. Total outstanding, $18,100. All of it addressed to Sarah Mercer. I want to be honest with you about the next decision, because I think the honest version of it is more useful than a cleaner one. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It wasn't a sudden surge of righteous energy. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying for so long, you stopped noticing the weight. I simply decided that I was finished subsidizing the idea that I did not belong in this family, financially or otherwise. I called Victor first. I explained that I would not be authorizing the final payment on his invoice, and that I was formally requesting the balance be redirected to Patricia and Gerald Mercer in Scottsdale. He said, "Understood, MS Mercer. And I want you to know I appreciate you being straightforward about it." I called Angela next, then the music agency, then the photographer, then the bakery. Each call was under 4 minutes. I was calm and factual in every one of them. I said the same thing each time. "I will not be authorizing this payment. Please redirect the outstanding balance to the event hosts at this address." Not one of them pushed back. They were professionals dealing with another professional, and the paperwork supported exactly what I was saying. Daniel called me 20 minutes after I finished the last vendor call. Patricia had apparently received a call from Victor almost immediately after mine. "Sarah," he said, and I could hear in those 2 syllables the precise weight of a man who has just been told something that rearranges several things he thought he understood. What happened? I told him everything. Patricia's comment to Victor, the exact words as Victor had repeated them, the note he had written, and then what I had done in response and why. Daniel was quiet for a long time, long enough that I checked the call was still connected. "She said that to the caterer," he said finally, not as a question. "She did," I said. He went quiet again. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have seen this coming a long time ago." I told him I knew that, and that I wasn't angry at him, which was true. He was a man who had loved his mother his entire life, and had spent that entire life gently managing the gap between who she was and who he needed her to be. That gap had simply gotten too wide for either of us to keep stepping over. Patricia called me directly 2 hours later. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that go too. She texted Daniel, and he came to find me in the living room of the hotel, sweet with his phone in his hand, and an expression I had never seen on him before. Something between anger and exhaustion. "She wants to know if you'll reconsider releasing the vendor payments," he said. "No," I said. "I know," he said. He sat down. He didn't ask me again. The next morning, Daniel drove to his parents' house alone. I stayed at the hotel and ordered room service and called my business partner back in Denver, a woman named Jo, who has been my professional anchor for 7 years and who said, when I told her everything good and then said it again, good. I needed to hear that word from someone who understood the value of what I had just protected. What happened next unfolded over the following 3 weeks, and I know it because Daniel told me, because Claire told Daniel, and because Aunt Renata, Gerald's younger sister, told me directly during a phone call. She initiated herself. Patricia had assumed the vendors would simply send the invoices back to me when they couldn't reach her. They did not. They were businesses with signed contracts, and the signed contracts said to follow the instructions of the contract holder, which was me, and my instructions were clear. Victor sent his invoice to the Scottsdale address. Angela sent hers. The agency sent theirs. The photographer sent his. Patricia called each vendor personally, attempting to dispute the redirection. Victor was polite but firm. He told her, "Ma'am, MS. Mercer is the contract holder of record, and she has formally declined to authorize this payment on your behalf. That is within her legal right as the signatory." He said it the same way he had spoken to me on the phone, precise and professional and completely immovable. The $18,100 was eventually paid through a combination of a personal loan Gerald took out quietly without telling Patricia until it was done, $4,000 Claire contributed after her mother asked her twice, and a partial payment from Patricia's own savings account that she had apparently been building for a kitchen renovation. Gerald told Daniel about the loan 2 weeks later, over coffee without anger. He said, "Your mother made a mistake, Daniel. I hope Sarah knows I understand that." Daniel relayed this to me exactly as Gerald had said it, word for word, because he knows that precision matters to me. Claire sent me a text about a month after the event. It was long and slightly incoherent in the way of messages written in genuine distress rather than calculated strategy. She said she was sorry things had gotten so messy. She said she hadn't meant for any of it to spiral this way. She said she hoped Daniel and I were doing okay. She said she missed having me around. Not one sentence in the message acknowledged what Patricia had said to Victor, or what it had meant, or what it had cost me to hear it secondhand from a professional I had hired. It was an apology for the inconvenience of the aftermath, not for the thing that had caused it. I have read enough of these messages now to recognize them on first contact. I wrote back, "Claire, I appreciate you reaching out. I'm not in a place right now where I can pretend the last few months were simply messy. When you want to talk about what actually happened, I'm here for that conversation." She read it and didn't respond, which told me everything I needed to know about whether she was ready for that conversation. It has now been 5 months since the anniversary party. Daniel and I are still in Denver. We are still married, and I want to be clear about that because I know people assume these kinds of family fractures always crack the marriage at the center of them. They don't always. What they sometimes do, if you're fortunate and if you have built something real together, is clarify it. Daniel went back to Phoenix for 2 days last month for a family obligation that had nothing to do with us. And when he came home, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I owe you more than I've given you in this." I said I knew that, and I meant it without bitterness, which surprised both of us a little. Patricia and I have not spoken. I don't expect that to change quickly, and I have made peace with that expectation. What I have not made peace with, and what I think it would be dishonest to pretend I have, is the particular sting of having given 6 months of professional evil work to someone who turned around and described me to a hired vendor as just a helper. I know what that phrase was for. It was for the audience of 60 guests and the staff of a venue that Patricia wanted to believe she had built something inside without outside help. It was about credit and control, and the specific discomfort some people feel when someone they can't fully categorize does something they can't fully dismiss. I am a helper, that's actually true. I help people build the most important moments of their lives. I have been doing it for 11 years. I just don't do it for free anymore, for people who have made it clear that free is the only version of me they intended to acknowledge. What I want to say to you directly, if you're somewhere in your own version of this story, is something that took me a long time to understand personally. The moment you contribute something of real value to people who then redefine it as small so they can keep it without owing you anything, you have 3 choices. You can accept their definition, you can fight their definition, or you can simply let them discover as quietly and professionally as possible what the actual definition was. I chose the third option. Victor had my name on the paperwork, that was enough. There's a specific kind of freedom that comes with realizing your value was never actually in question by the people who mattered. It was only in question by the people who needed to believe it was smaller than it was, so they could feel bigger than they were. I don't carry that distinction for them anymore. It's not my weight to carry. Thank you for staying with me through this one. It means more than I know how to say. Before I let you go, I want to ask you this directly. When someone undervalues what you contribute to them, which do you do? Accept it, fight it, or simply let the paperwork speak? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I think the answers to that question are going to be more interesting than anything I could say. If this story sat with you, hit subscribe and join us on the Quiet Reckoning. I share a new story every week about family, about value, and about what happens when quiet people finally decide they're done being overlooked. And if you're in the mood for another story along these same lines, check the description below. I think you'll recognize yourself in that one too. I'll see you in the next one.